September 8, 1945. Fort Bliss, Texas. The medical building stood at the edge of the compound, whitewashed walls reflecting morning sun so bright it made your eyes water. 32 German women stood in formation outside, their gray prisoner uniforms already soaked through with sweat despite the early hour. Staff Sergeant Helen Morrison emerged from the building carrying a clipboard. She was a nurse from Iowa, 43 years old, with the particular expression of someone who'd seen enough suffering to develop professional detachment, but not enough to lose basic humanity. She walked down the line, checking prisoner numbers against her list. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat efficiency of medical personnel delivering instructions, not making conversation. Medical examinations begin in 10 minutes. You'll be called individually. When you enter the examination room, you will remove all clothing. Full body examination, required by Geneva Convention Article 10 for all prisoners of war. The translator, a German-American corporal from Wisconsin, rendered the words into precise German. Ziehen Sie alle Kleidung aus. Remove all clothing. The phrase landed like a grenade in still water. Among the women stood Margarete Wolf, 32 years old, mother of 2, former military nurse from Hamburg who'd spent 3 years treating wounded soldiers in field hospitals from Poland to France. She'd seen men die on operating tables, had held their hands as they bled out, had learned to function in spaces where death was administrative routine rather than exceptional tragedy. But she'd also heard the warnings. Every German woman had heard them. Warnings about what Americans did to female prisoners, about examinations that weren't medical, about violations disguised as procedures, about how the enemy used women's bodies as weapons of humiliation. She expected this was how they would break them, not with bullets or bombs, with the particular violence that targeted what made them vulnerable. She was wrong. What waited in that examination room would break her in a completely different way, by proving that everything she'd been told about the enemy was a lie, and everything she'd believed about her own country was a comfortable fiction that required willful blindness to maintain. Margarete Wolf had been a nurse for 9 years. She'd trained at Hamburg's Universitätsklinikum, one of Germany's finest medical schools, had learned anatomy, pharmacology, surgical technique from professors who demanded precision and punished carelessness. She'd graduated third in her class in 1936, proud to be joining a profession that saved lives rather than took them. Then came the war, and the profession changed. By 1941, she was working in military field hospitals, mobile units that followed Wehrmacht advances, treating soldiers close enough to the front that you could hear artillery fire between patient screams. She'd learned to perform triage under bombardment, to amputate without adequate anesthesia, to make decisions about who received scarce morphine and who would simply have to endure. She'd saved hundreds of men, had watched thousands die despite her best efforts, had become the kind of medical professional who could work in blood up to her elbows and still maintain steady hands because breaking down meant patients died. She'd also learned what happened when medical supplies ran out. The last year of the war, she'd worked without adequate antibiotics, without proper surgical equipment, without anesthesia for all but the most extreme cases. She'd watched men die from infections that penicillin could have cured, watched gangrene consume limbs that proper antiseptic might have saved, watched soldiers suffer through operations where the only pain relief was leather straps to bite and colleagues to hold them down. That was what war did to medicine, turned healing into desperate improvisation, turned doctors and nurses into people who learned to function in scarcity, who adapted to doing less with nothing, who accepted that most patients would die and the best you could hope for was making a few survive. She'd been captured in April 1945, swept up with other medical staff when British forces overran the hospital where she worked. She'd expected execution, mercy killings for nurses who'd kept enemy soldiers alive to fight again. Instead, she'd received paperwork, forms to fill out, prisoner number, transport to holding camps where American efficiency replaced German chaos. She had 2 children, Maria, 8 years old, Hans, 6, left with her mother in Hamburg while Margarete served with the medical corps. She hadn't seen them since Christmas 1944. Didn't know if they'd survived the firebombing that consumed much of the city in July. The Red Cross was processing family location requests, but the system was overwhelmed. Millions of displaced people. Millions of families separated. She thought about them constantly. About whether they had enough food, whether they were warm, whether they were alive. And now she stood outside a medical building in Texas, about to be told to remove her clothes by an enemy who had won the war and could do whatever they wanted with prisoners who had no rights, no recourse, no protection except whatever mercy their captors chose to extend. They had been warned specifically about medical examinations. The briefings came in the final weeks of the war, when it became clear Germany was collapsing. Officers gathered female auxiliaries, nurses, clerks, radio operators, anyone who'd worn a uniform, and explained what to expect if captured. The Americans will conduct so-called medical examinations, a female officer had told them, her voice carrying the particular bitterness of someone describing atrocities she believed were coming. They will claim it's required by the Geneva Convention. They will use medical language, clinical terminology. But you must understand, these examinations are designed to humiliate, to violate, to break your spirit. She'd paused, looking at the assembled women with something like pity. They will make you remove your clothing in front of male soldiers. They will touch you inappropriately and call it examination. They will take photographs of your naked bodies for distribution among their troops. They will perform procedures that have no medical purpose except to demonstrate your powerlessness. Another officer had added, "Some of you are mothers. Remember that American soldiers have been told German women are complicit in war crimes. They see you as guilty. They believe whatever they do to you is justified as punishment for what Germany did. Expect no mercy. Expect no professionalism. Expect them to use your bodies as weapons against your dignity." Margaret had filed that away with all the other warnings. Some had proven exaggerated. Americans didn't execute prisoners on sight, didn't torture for information, didn't starve POWs deliberately. They followed rules, documented everything, treated imprisonment as an administrative process rather than an opportunity for revenge. But this warning, about medical examinations, about forced nudity, about violation disguised as procedure, maybe this one was accurate. Maybe this was where American civility ended and the real punishment began. The journey to Texas had been a transit through cognitive dissonance. Margaret had been processed through 3 holding camps in occupied Germany, each one more organized than the last, each one demonstrating American efficiency that felt both impressive and terrifying in its systematization of imprisonment. Medical screening in the first camp, superficial examination, delousing, basic documentation, male doctors, female translators, everything quick and impersonal, uncomfortable but not violating, professional enough that she'd thought, maybe the warnings were exaggerated. The ship crossing took 19 days. Below deck in converted cargo holds, women packed in bunks, stacked 4 high. The smell was unbearable, bodies, seasickness, diesel fumes, the particular odor of too many people in too little space. But they were fed twice daily, received water, had access to latrines that worked. The bare minimum, yes, but still minimum, which was more than German civilians had in many cities by war's end. When they docked in Galveston, the heat hit like walking into an oven. Nothing in Germany prepared you for Texas in August. The air was thick, wet, impossible to breathe comfortably. Sweat appeared instantly and never stopped. Buses carried them inland through landscapes that looked untouched by war. Small towns with intact buildings, farms with growing crops, children playing in yards who stopped to stare at the buses full of enemy women. Some waved. Others just watched with expressions that mixed curiosity and hostility. One woman had whispered, "They have everything. We have nothing. And they look at us like we're the criminals." No one answered because it was true and unbearable, and there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Fort Bliss appeared out of desert scrubland like a mirage. White buildings, guard towers, fences that were administrative boundaries rather than prison walls. Everything organized, categorized, documented with the particular American obsession with paperwork. They'd been fed that first night. Real food, meat that had texture, vegetables that weren't salvaged from rot, bread that tasted like bread rather than sawdust compressed into edible form. Margaret had eaten mechanically, her medical training noting, "This is adequate nutrition. More than adequate. This is what bodies need to function properly." But her mind refused to process what that meant, that prisoners ate better than she'd eaten in the last 2 years of freedom. The first week at Fort Bliss had been orientation, rules explained through translators, work assignments based on skills. Medical personnel were assigned to the camp infirmary, light duty assisting American medical staff with minor prisoner health issues. Margaret expected suspicion from the American nurses, expected to be treated as the enemy pretending at profession. Instead, they treated her like a colleague, asked about her training, discussed procedures, showed her where supplies were kept with the casual assumption that she would handle them competently. It was disorienting. She'd worked alongside them for 4 days before the announcement came. All female prisoners required full medical examination within 2 weeks of arrival. Geneva Convention mandate, non-negotiable. The barracks had erupted in whispered fear that night. "This is it," one woman said. "This is where they stop pretending to be civilized." "They'll photograph us," another added. "Use the pictures to humiliate us. Prove we're helpless." An older woman, a former teacher from Munich, had tried to inject reason. "It's probably legitimate medical screening. They documented everything else. Why would this be different?" "Because we're women," someone snapped. "Because they can. Because we have no power to stop them." Margaret had said nothing. Just lay in her bunk trying to calculate probabilities. Her medical training said, examination makes sense. Prisoners arrive malnourished, potentially disease-carrying, requiring baseline health documentation. Standard procedure. But her memory of the warning said, this is when violation happens, when you're most vulnerable, when you have no choice but to comply. She didn't know which voice to believe. Diary entry, September 7th, 1945. Medical examination tomorrow. They say it's required. Geneva Convention. All female prisoners. Full examination, which means removing clothes. I've performed thousands of examinations. I know what legitimate medical procedure looks like, but I also know what power can do when there's no oversight, when victims have no recourse, when men decide women's bodies are available for whatever purpose serves them. I want to believe the Americans will be professional. Want to believe medical means medical. But I've spent 5 years watching what happens when systems collapse, when rules stop mattering, when the vulnerable become targets. Tomorrow I'll find out which version of humanity exists in this camp. That night sleep was impossible. Women whispered in the darkness, sharing fears, making plans that weren't really plans because there was nothing to plan. You couldn't refuse. Refusing meant punishment, solitary confinement, reduced rations, loss of privileges. Compliance was mandatory. Stay silent, one woman advised. Don't give them the satisfaction of reaction. Don't cry, don't beg, just endure. Remember you're German, another added. Remember we don't break, we survive. Margaret thought about her medical training, about how to perform procedures that respected patient dignity, about the importance of explanation, consent, minimizing exposure, about treating people as humans rather than bodies to be examined. She wondered if American military doctors had similar training, if medical ethics crossed national boundaries, if the Hippocratic Oath meant anything when patients were enemy prisoners. She didn't know. She would find out tomorrow. Morning came with the clang of the wake-up bell and the shuffle of boots on barracks floors. The 32 women assembled outside the medical building in formation. Sergeant Morrison stood with her clipboard, calling names in alphabetical order. Each woman disappeared through the door. Each was gone for approximately 20 minutes. Each emerged looking confused. Not traumatized, not crying, just confused. Which somehow made the waiting worse. When Margaret's name was called, Wolf, Margaret, prisoner 3847. Her legs felt unsteady. She walked through the door into a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and something faintly sweet. Cleaning solution, maybe. The walls were painted institutional white. Doors lined both sides with small plaques indicating function. Examination Room 1, Examination Room 2, X-ray, Laboratory. A female nurse, American, perhaps 35, gestured her toward Room 3. The nurse wore standard Army Medical Corps uniform, her expression professionally neutral. Inside, the examination room looked exactly like examination rooms Margaret had worked in during her training. An examination table with stirrups folded against the sides, a rolling stool, cabinets containing supplies, a scale, a height measurement bar. Everything clean, organized, exactly what you'd expect in a functioning medical facility. Also present, a female doctor. Captain's insignia. Perhaps 40 years old. She stood reviewing a file while the nurse prepared equipment. The doctor looked up as Margaret entered. When she spoke, it was in English with the slow clarity of someone aware they're communicating across a language barrier. I'm Captain Sarah Chen. I'll be conducting your examination today. Do you speak English? The nurse translated into German. Margaret nodded. Some. Medical English. Not conversation. That's fine. I'll explain everything as we proceed. First, I need you to remove your clothing completely. You can place your uniform on that chair. We'll provide a gown for the examination. There it was. The moment she'd been dreading. Ziehen Sie alle Kleidung aus. Margaret's hands trembled as she began unbuttoning her uniform shirt. She expected the doctor and nurse to watch, expected leering, expected commentary. Instead, both women turned away, gave her privacy. The nurse busied herself with supplies. The doctor made notes in the file. Let me know when you're ready, the doctor said, still not looking. Margaret removed her clothes with shaking hands. The uniform, the undergarments, everything. She stood naked in an enemy medical facility, feeling more vulnerable than she'd felt even under bombardment because, at least during air raids, you could run, could hide, could take some action however futile. Here, there was only compliance and trust. The nurse handed her a cotton gown. Arms through the sleeves. It ties in the back. Margaret put it on. The fabric was thin, but clean. It covered her, offered basic dignity. Ready, she said quietly. Dr. Chen turned around and smiled. Not a predatory smile. Not a cold smile. Just a professional expression of someone about to do their job. Thank you. Let's start with basic measurements. Can you step on the scale, please? Margaret complied. The nurse adjusted the weights while Dr. Chen recorded. 98 pounds, the nurse said. The doctor frowned. Made a note. And you're 5'6" according to intake records? Yes. That's severely underweight. When did you last have adequate nutrition? The question was clinical, medical, not accusatory. Margaret tried to remember. Christmas 1944. Before that, maybe. Food was scarce. Dr. Chen nodded, still making notes. For how long? 2 years, maybe more. It happened slowly. You don't notice when everyone is hungry together. The doctor looked up from her notes. Her expression had shifted, not to judgment, but to something like concern. We're going to do a full health assessment. I need to check for malnutrition-related damage, disease indicators, any conditions requiring immediate treatment. I'll explain each step before I do it. If anything is painful or uncomfortable, tell me immediately. Understood? Margaretta nodded, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. For professionalism to slip. For the real purpose of this examination to reveal itself. It never did. Dr. Chen conducted the examination with meticulous care, checking lymph nodes, listening to heart and lungs, examining eyes, throat, ears, palpating abdomen for organ abnormalities. Every action was narrated beforehand. Every touch was clinical, brief, purposeful. I'm checking for thyroid enlargement, common in iodine deficiency. Listening to your lungs, looking for fluid accumulation or scarring. Examining your hands, looking for vitamin deficiency indicators. The nurse assisted, handing instruments, recording findings, maintaining the same professional demeanor. When the pelvic examination came, the moment Margaret had been most dreading, Dr. Chen explained it with the same clinical clarity. I need to check for reproductive health issues, infections, anything requiring treatment. This will be uncomfortable but shouldn't be painful. The nurse will be present throughout. Ready? The examination was quick, efficient, respectful. No unnecessary exposure, no lingering. Just medical procedure performed competently by someone who clearly did this dozens of times daily and viewed it as routine healthcare rather than opportunity for violation. When it was finished, Dr. Chen snapped off her gloves and disposed of them, made final notes in the file. You can get dressed. We're done with the physical examination. Margaret stood there confused. That was it? No photographs, no humiliation, no violation disguised as medicine, just an actual medical examination? While Margaret dressed, Dr. Chen reviewed the file. When the German woman was clothed again, the doctor gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to discuss your health. Margaret sat, her mind still trying to process what had just happened, or rather, what hadn't happened. Dr. Chen pulled up the rolling stool and sat across from her, the file open in her lap. Mrs. Wolf, you're severely malnourished. Your weight is approximately 30 pounds below minimum healthy range for your height. I found indicators of multiple vitamin deficiencies. Scurvy, beriberi, pellagra. Your teeth show significant decay from calcium deficiency. You have anemia. Your lungs show scarring consistent with a recent respiratory infection that wasn't properly treated. She paused, letting the translator catch up. If you had stayed in your current condition for another 6 months, you would likely have developed tuberculosis, suffered organ damage, possibly died from complications of malnutrition. Do you understand what I'm saying? Margaret stared at her. I was dying. You were dying slowly. Your body was consuming itself. That's what malnutrition does. It's not just hunger. It's systematic breakdown of tissues, organs, immune function. Your body was prioritizing survival over health, which means eventually survival fails too. The doctor closed the file and looked at her directly. We're putting you on a therapeutic feeding plan. Increased caloric intake, approximately 2,500 calories daily to start, gradually increasing as your system adjusts. Vitamin supplements, B complex, C, D, iron, dental treatment for the decay, monitoring for tuberculosis development, weekly weigh-ins to track progress. She said it matter-of-factly, not like she was doing Marguerite a favor, like she was describing standard medical procedure for a patient requiring treatment. Why? Margaret heard herself ask. Why heal me? I'm a prisoner, enemy, German. Dr. Chen looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and something like sadness. Because you're a patient, because I'm a doctor, because the Hippocratic Oath doesn't have an exception clause for enemy prisoners. She paused. And because the Geneva Convention requires medical care for all POWs, regardless of nationality. We follow the rules, Mrs. Wolf. Especially when it's hard. The weekly weigh-ins became routine. Every Monday morning, Margarete and other women from her barracks lined up outside the medical building. Each stepped on the scale. Each had their weight recorded. Each received updated meal plans if necessary. The first week, Margaret had gained 3 pounds. The nurse recorded it with satisfaction. Good progress. Your body is responding well to proper nutrition. The second week, 4 more pounds. Dr. Chen reviewed the chart and nodded. Excellent. Your system is stabilizing. How are you feeling? Strange, Margaret admitted. I have energy. I haven't felt like this in years. That's what adequate nutrition does. You're experiencing what normal human health feels like. What you felt before, the exhaustion, the fog, the constant cold, that was your body shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core organs. By the third week, Margaret had gained 11 pounds total. She weighed 109 pounds, still underweight, but no longer in the danger zone. She looked at the number on the chart and felt something complicated twist in her chest. Relief that she was healing. horror at how close she'd come to dying without realizing it. And something else. Something darker. Guilt. Guilt that she was gaining weight while her mother and children were still in Hamburg, still hungry, still struggling with food scarcity that wouldn't end just because the war had. Guilt that she was being healed by the enemy while her own country had let all of them, slowly starve without adequate medical care or nutrition. Guilt that survival was happening in captivity rather than freedom. Diary entry, September 29, 1945. Weigh-in today, 109 pounds. Gained 11 pounds in 3 weeks. Dr. Chen says I'm out of immediate danger. Says my body is responding well to treatment. Treatment. They're treating me. Healing me. The enemy is healing me. I expected violation. Got medicine instead. Expected humiliation. Got professional health care. Expected them to use my body as a weapon against my dignity. Instead, they used it as proof that I'm human, that I deserve health, that being German and prisoner doesn't disqualify me from medical care. I don't know how to process this. Don't know what it means that I'm healthier after 1 month as prisoner than I was after 2 years as free German citizen. 1 month into treatment, doctor. Chen called Margaret into her office. I want to show you something, the doctor said, opening the medical file. Inside were charts, graphs, documentation of every measurement, every observation, every treatment administered. This is your intake assessment. Dr. Chen pointed to the first page. Weight, 98 pounds. Blood pressure, 90/60, dangerously low. Heart rate, 52 beats per minute. Bradycardia caused by malnutrition. Hemoglobin, 8 grams per deciliter. Severe anemia. Vitamin B1, undetectable. Vitamin C, undetectable. Dental caries, 7 teeth with significant decay. She flipped to more recent pages. This is you now. Weight, 112 pounds. Blood pressure, 110/70, normal. Heart rate, 68 beats per minute, normal. Hemoglobin, 11.5 grams per deciliter, low normal. Vitamin levels, improving but still deficient. Dental caries, being treated. 3 fillings completed, 4 more scheduled. Margaret stared at the numbers. Medical data didn't lie. This was objective proof of transformation. Why are you showing me this? She asked. Because you need to understand what happened to you. What was happening to you before capture. Your body was failing, Mrs. Wolf. Not dramatically, not obviously, just slowly shutting down. Another 6 months and you would have been beyond help. Dr. Chen closed the file. When you go home, and you will go home eventually, I want you to understand that what happened to you wasn't normal, wasn't inevitable, wasn't just wartime scarcity. It was systematic failure to provide basic human needs. You nearly died because someone decided your life wasn't worth adequate food or medical care. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Not an accusation of Margaret, an accusation of the system that had let her deteriorate to the point where enemy captivity became medical salvation. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk thinking about the charts, about the numbers that proved she'd been dying, about how normal it had felt, the exhaustion, the constant cold, the way food became obsession and nothing else mattered because nothing else existed beyond the next meal. She thought about her children, about whether they were experiencing the same slow deterioration, about whether her mother was rationing food to keep Maria and Hans alive, sacrificing her own health the way mothers do. She thought about the other women in the barracks, about how many of them were experiencing the same transformation, bodies healing, weight increasing, energy returning, about how many of them were grappling with the same terrible realization: we're healthier as prisoners than we were as free citizens. The enemy is healing us while our own country let us die. Around her she could hear quiet crying. Not everyone, but enough. Women processing the same devastating knowledge. Women who'd expected violation and received care. Women who'd been prepared for cruelty and found competence. Women who now had to carry the unbearable weight of understanding that the propaganda had been exactly backwards. That the monsters were on the other side of the fence. That everything they'd believed about enemies and allies, about who would harm them and who would save them, had been a comfortable lie that reality was systematically demolishing. One woman whispered in the darkness, "How do we go home knowing this? How do we look our families in the eye when we're healthy and they're not? When we were saved by Americans and abandoned by Germans?" No one answered, because there was no answer that didn't require rethinking everything. No response that didn't demand you rebuild your entire understanding of loyalty, patriotism, and which country had actually earned your trust. By October, the changes were impossible to ignore. Margaret stepped on the scale for her 5th weekly weigh-in and watched the nurse adjust the weights with practiced efficiency. The metal sliders moved right, stopped, moved right again. 123 pounds, the nurse announced, recording it in the chart. 25 pounds in 7 weeks. Dr. Chen reviewed the numbers and nodded with satisfaction. Excellent progress. You're approaching normal weight range for your height. How are you feeling physically? Strong, Margaret admitted. I can work full shifts without exhaustion. I sleep better. My hands don't shake anymore when I try to hold instruments steady. That's adequate nutrition. Your body is remembering how to function at full capacity. The doctor paused. But how are you feeling mentally? Emotionally? Margaret didn't answer immediately. How could she explain the complicated knot of emotions that tightened every time she stepped on the scale? Relief at being healthy warred with guilt at gaining weight. Gratitude for treatment crashed against resentment that treatment was necessary. Joy at feeling strong collided with horror at what that strength meant. Confused, she said finally. I'm healthier as a prisoner than I was as a free woman. I don't know what to do with that knowledge. Dr. Chen set down her pen and looked at Margaret with an expression that was no longer just professional but something closer to compassionate. You're not alone in feeling that way. Most of the women in your barracks are experiencing the same transformation, physically and psychologically. She hesitated, then added, We're documenting everything. Weight gain, health improvements, recovery timelines. Not to use against you, but because when you go home, when you tell people what happened here, you'll need evidence. Numbers don't lie. These records prove you weren't collaborators being rewarded. You were dying patients being treated. The distinction mattered. Evidence mattered. Because Margaret knew what awaited when she returned to Germany: suspicion, questions, accusations of collaboration. How else would she explain returning healthy when everyone else was still suffering? The medical records would be her defense. Proof that survival wasn't betrayal, it was medicine. In late October, the Army required updated identification photographs for all prisoners. Standard procedure for administrative records. Margaret stood against a white wall while a board corporal adjusted the camera. Look straight ahead. No smiling, just neutral expression. The flash went off. The corporal checked the result, nodded, gestured her away. Next. 2 weeks later, Dr. Chen called her to the medical office. On the desk were 2 photographs side by side. I want you to see something, the doctor said. The first photograph was from intake. September 8, 1945. Margaret stared at a stranger. A woman with hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, skin stretched tight over bones, hair lank and lifeless. The woman looked 50 years old, looked sick, looked like she was dying slowly and didn't realize it. The second photograph was from last week. Same woman, but transformed. Filled out face, clear eyes, healthy skin, hair with body and shine. The woman looked her actual age, 32, and looked alive in a way the first photograph suggested she hadn't been in years. These were taken 9 weeks apart, Dr. Chen said quietly. This is what adequate nutrition and medical care does. This is visual proof of what happened to you before capture and what happened after. Margaret couldn't stop staring at the side-by-side comparison. The before looked like a corpse walking. The after looked like a person. I don't recognize her, she whispered, pointing to the intake photo. I know that's me. I remember that day. But I don't remember looking like that. How did I not know? Because it happened gradually. Because everyone around you looked similar. Because in scarcity, deterioration becomes normal and you lose perspective on what healthy actually looks like. Dr. Chen pushed the photographs toward her. I'm giving you copies. Keep them. Show them to your family when you go home. Show them what the Reich did to you. What America undid. Margaret took the photographs with shaking hands. Visual evidence that couldn't be argued with. Proof that she'd been rescued from something she hadn't fully understood she was experiencing. Diary entry, October 28, 1945. Dr. Chen showed me photographs today. Before and after. I didn't recognize the before. Didn't remember being that skeletal, that sick, that close to death. How do you not notice yourself dying? How does slow starvation become so normal you stop seeing it? I weigh 125 pounds now. Gained 27 pounds in 8 weeks. The woman in the after photo looks healthy, strong, alive. The woman in the before photo looks like a ghost. I was that ghost. I taught myself not to see it, because seeing it meant acknowledging that Germany was killing us slowly. That the Reich prioritized everything except keeping its people fed, that I was expendable. In November, Margaret received her first letter from Hamburg. Her mother's handwriting was shaky but legible. The paper was thin, cheap stock, probably salvaged. The words were carefully chosen, aware that censors would read everything. My dearest Margaret, we received notification that you are alive and held in America. This brings relief beyond words. We feared the worst when communication stopped. Maria and Hans are with me. They are alive but thin. Food remains scarce. The occupation authorities provide rations, but not enough. We survive, we manage, we think of you constantly. Your sister Helga is not well. The doctor says malnutrition has damaged her heart. There is little that can be done. Medicine is scarce. She may not survive winter. Please write when you can. The children ask about you daily. I tell them you will come home when the authorities permit. I tell them you are being treated well. I hope this is true. Your loving mother. Margaret read the letter 3 times, each word a small blade. Sie sind am Leben aber dünn. They are alive but thin. Her children were experiencing what she had experienced. Were slowly starving the way she had slowly starved. Were losing weight while she gained it. Were getting sicker while she got healthier. The guilt crashed over her like a physical wave. That evening she wrote back, "Dearest mother, I am healthy. They feed us adequately here. We receive medical care. I have gained weight and feel stronger than I have in years. I know how this sounds. I know what you must think reading those words. But I need you to understand. I was dying. I didn't realize it. The Americans conducted medical examinations and discovered I was severely malnourished. That my organs were failing. That I would have died within months. They saved my life. The enemy saved my life while Germany let me deteriorate to the point where imprisonment became salvation. I don't know how to come home knowing this. Don't know how to look at Maria and Hans, thin, suffering, while I am healthy and strong. Don't know how to explain that the country we served, that Papa died for, that we sacrificed everything for, that country let us starve while claiming to protect us. Hold the children close. Tell them I love them. Tell them I will come home as soon as permitted. But know that when I return, I will not be the woman who left. I will be someone who understands that loyalty to country and love for people are not the same thing. That sometimes the enemy proves more merciful than your own nation. I am sending what money I can from my camp labor wages. It is not much, but perhaps it helps. Your daughter, who is learning difficult truths in captivity." She sealed the letter knowing it would likely be censored, knowing her mother might never receive those paragraphs about Germany's failures, knowing that speaking truth was dangerous even from inside an American prisoner of war camp. She sent it anyway. The weight gain continued. By December, Margaret weighed 131 pounds. Healthy weight for her height. Normal. Strong. She worked in the camp infirmary alongside American medical staff. Her nursing skills were valuable. They treated her as a colleague, asked her opinions, trusted her with patient care, included her in case discussions. She was more useful as a prisoner than she'd been as a free German nurse in the final years of the war. Had better equipment, better supplies, better support systems. Could actually help patients instead of just documenting their deterioration. The cognitive dissonance was crushing. She expected to hate her captors, expected to resent her imprisonment, expected to long for freedom with the desperate hunger of someone confined against their will. Instead, she felt grateful, safe, protected in ways she hadn't felt in years. And the guilt of that gratitude was unbearable. One evening, working late in the infirmary, she broke down. Just collapsed against the supply cabinet and sobbed, great heaving cries that came from somewhere below her ribs and wouldn't stop. The American nurse on duty, Lieutenant Patricia Morrison from Iowa, found her there. Hey, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" Margaret couldn't speak, could only shake her head and continue crying. Morrison guided her to a chair, sat beside her, waited patiently until the storm passed. "I'm sorry," Margaret managed eventually, in broken English. "I'm grateful to be here, to be healthy. And I hate that I feel grateful. Hate that prison is better than freedom was. Hate that my children starve while I eat. Hate that the enemy treats me better than my country did." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My brother was in Germany, April 1945. He wrote letters about what he saw. The civilians, the children, the walking skeletons in cities that had been bombed to rubble. He said the hardest part wasn't fighting the enemy. It was seeing what the enemy had done to its own people. How the Reich had consumed everything, everyone, in service of war. How ordinary Germans had been sacrificed for ideology." She paused, then added, "You're not a bad person for feeling grateful to be healthy. You're not betraying your family by gaining weight. You're experiencing what it means to be treated like a human being deserves to be treated. And it's devastating because you realize how abnormal the alternative was." Margarete looked at her, this enemy soldier offering comfort, and felt something shift in her understanding of the world. Diary entry, December 10th, 1945. I weigh 131 pounds. I am healthy, strong. I work in the infirmary and am treated as colleague rather than prisoner. I have adequate food, medical care, safety. And I feel crushing guilt every moment because my children don't have these things. Because I am thriving in captivity while my family suffers in freedom. Lieutenant Morrison said I'm not betraying anyone by being healthy. Said I'm just experiencing what human beings deserve. But how do I reconcile that? How do I accept that the enemy proved more humane than my own nation? How do I go home carrying this knowledge? March 1946. Repatriation orders came 6 months after arrival. All German female prisoners would be transported to New York, then shipped back to Europe for release in occupied zones. Processing would begin immediately. Final medical examinations were required before transport. Documentation of current health status for handover to Allied occupation authorities. Margaret stood in the examination room one last time while Dr. Chen conducted the assessment. Weight, 133 pounds. Blood pressure, 115/75. Heart rate, 70 beats per minute. Hemoglobin, 13 grams per deciliter, fully normal. Vitamin levels, normal across all categories. Dental work, complete. Lung function, normal. Overall assessment, patient has made full recovery from severe malnutrition and associated conditions. Patient is healthy and cleared for repatriation. Dr. Chen closed the file and looked at Margaret. You arrived here dying. You're leaving healthy. That's what medicine is supposed to do. Heal people. She paused. I'm going to give you something. Officially, I'm not supposed to, but I'm doing it anyway. She handed Margaret a manila envelope. Inside, complete medical records. Every examination, every measurement, every treatment. The before and after photographs. A detailed letter summarizing her condition at intake and her current health status. This is evidence, Dr. Chen said. When people question how you survived, how you returned healthy when others didn't, show them this. Show them the numbers. Show them that you were dying and we treated you according to Geneva Convention requirements. Show them that health isn't betrayal, it's medicine. Margaret took the envelope with trembling hands. Why are you giving me this? Why help me? Because I'm a doctor. Because documentation matters. Because truth matters. Dr. Chen extended her hand for a handshake. And because you're going home to a country that needs medical professionals who understand the importance of treating all patients, even enemy patients, with dignity. Take that lesson with you. That night in the barracks, women packed their few belongings, preparing for the journey home, discussing what awaited them. Some were excited. Finally, back to Germany, back to family. Others were terrified. What if there's nothing left? What if everyone's dead? What if home doesn't exist anymore? A few were conflicted. I should be happy, but I'm scared. Scared of going back to hunger, to scarcity, to the system that let us deteriorate. Margaret sat on her bunk, holding the medical records envelope. Photograph. But people will ask questions, will wonder how you came back healthy when everyone else is still suffering. Will suspect collaboration. I know. Margaret gathered the records. That's why I kept these. Evidence. Proof that health wasn't betrayal, it was medicine. That I was a patient, not a collaborator. Will people believe that? I don't know. I hope so. But even if they don't, it's the truth. And I'm tired of lies, Mama. Tired of pretending things were better than they were. Tired of loyalty to a country that let its people die while claiming to protect them. Margaret Wolf returned to nursing in 1947. She worked in Hamburg hospitals treating malnutrition, disease, the lingering health effects of war and starvation. She used the skills she'd learned working alongside American medical staff, not just medical technique, but the philosophy that all patients deserved care, regardless of who they were or what they'd done. She kept the medical records, showed them to colleagues who questioned her health, showed them to officials who suspected collaboration, showed them to patients who asked why she looked so much healthier than other returning prisoners. The documents became her testimony. Proof that American prisoner of war camps had followed Geneva Convention requirements while German systems had systematically neglected civilian health. In 1950, she was invited to speak at a medical conference about nutrition and recovery from severe malnutrition. She brought the records, showed the photographs, described the treatment protocols American doctors had used. Some in the audience were angry. You're praising the enemy, making Germany look bad. Others were thoughtful. You're describing what medical care should look like, what we should aspire to. In 1960, she testified at a Nuremberg successor trial about conditions in wartime Germany, about systematic malnutrition, about how the Reich had prioritized war over civilian health, about how ordinary Germans had been expendable resources rather than citizens deserving protection. She brought the medical records. They were entered as evidence. In 1975, a researcher studying prisoner of war treatment interviewed her for an oral history project. Margaret was 62, still working part-time as a nurse educator. Do you ever regret keeping those records? The researcher asked. Do you ever wish you could just forget? Margaret looked at the now yellowed documents. 30 years old, fragile, but still legible. No, because forgetting means the next generation never learns, never understands what happens when governments stop valuing human life, when ideology matters more than health, when people become expendable. She paused, then added, Those records saved my life twice. Once by documenting what treatment I needed. Once by proving I wasn't a collaborator, just a patient. That's worth remembering. In 1989, Margaretti died at 76. Among her possessions, the medical records, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. A note attached. These documents prove that even in war, humanity is possible. That even enemies can choose mercy. That medical ethics cross all boundaries. Keep them. Show them. Remember them. Her daughter Maria, who survived the post-war hunger and became a doctor herself, donated the records to a medical museum. They're displayed now in an exhibit about prisoner of war healthcare and Geneva Convention implementation. The before and after photographs are the centerpiece. The contrast is still shocking. The transformation is still undeniable. And the lesson is still relevant. That sometimes survival comes from unexpected sources. That sometimes the enemy proves more merciful than your own nation. That sometimes being told to take your clothes off means not violation, but the beginning of healing. Because health doesn't recognize borders. Medicine doesn't acknowledge enemies. And sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply treating a human being like they deserve to live, regardless of which uniform they wore, which country they served, which side of the war they fought on. Margaret Wolfe weighed 98 pounds when she was told to undress in that Texas examination room. She expected violation. She received medicine. She weighed 133 pounds when she left. She carried evidence. And for 43 years afterward, she told anyone who would listen, "The enemy saved my life. Not because they were good, not because I was special, but because they followed rules designed to preserve human dignity, even in war's worst moments." That's the truth. However uncomfortable, however complicated, however necessary for the next generation to understand. Around her, other women debated what to take, what to leave, how to carry their few possessions across an ocean. One woman noticed the envelope. "What's that?" "Medical records. Dr. Chen gave them to me. Documentation of everything." "Are you taking them?" Margaret thought about that question. Taking the records meant carrying evidence of how severely malnourished she'd been. Meant having proof that Germany had failed her. Meant documentation that American medical care had saved her life. Taking the records meant carrying proof that complicated the narrative of German victimhood and Allied cruelty. Not taking them meant the story would be her word against suspicion, meant no evidence to counter accusations of collaboration. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm taking them, because truth matters more than comfortable lies." Diary entry, March 20th, 1946. Final entry from America. "Tomorrow I board the ship home. I weigh 133 pounds, 35 pounds more than when I arrived. I am healthy. I have energy. I can work full days without exhaustion. My teeth are fixed. My vitamin deficiencies are corrected. My body functions the way human bodies are supposed to function. The enemy did this. American doctors, nurses, medical staff who could have let me die, who would have been justified letting me die, chose instead to heal me. I'm carrying medical records home, evidence of what happened, proof that I was dying and they saved me. I don't know how my family will react. Don't know if they'll understand or resent or accuse. I only know I can't lie about this. Can't pretend I survived through my own strength. I survived because the enemy chose mercy over revenge. That's the truth, however uncomfortable it makes people. April 1946. Hamburg. The ship docked in Bremerhaven. Buses carried repatriated prisoners through Germany, through cities that were rubble, through countryside scarred by war, through a landscape that looked like the end of the world. Margaret pressed her face to the bus window and tried to recognize her country. Failed. Hamburg was worse than she'd imagined. Entire neighborhoods gone. Buildings that were just shells, walls standing with nothing inside. People living in basements. Children playing in rubble. Women queuing for rations with the particular exhaustion of people who'd been hungry too long. Her mother's building was still standing, partially. The top 2 floors had been bombed away. The ground floor remained functional. Margaret climbed the stairs with her small bag of possessions and the medical records envelope, knocked on the door that had been home. Her mother opened it, stared, didn't recognize her for a long moment. Then, "Margaret?" "Yes, Mama, it's me." Her mother's eyes traveled over her, taking in the healthy frame, the filled-out face, the strength that radiated from someone adequately nourished. "You look—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Healthy, I know. Can I come in?" Inside the apartment, Maria and Hans sat at a small table. Both children were thin, painfully thin, the kind of thin that made Margaret's medical training scream danger. "Mama!" Maria jumped up, hesitated. "You're different." "I'm your mother." Margaret knelt down, opening her arms. Both children hugged her. She felt their ribs through their clothes, felt how light they were, felt the evidence of months of inadequate nutrition, and felt the crushing guilt return with renewed force. That evening, After the children were asleep, Margaret sat with her mother in the small kitchen. Between them, the medical records envelope. "Tell me," her mother said. "Tell me what happened. How you look like this while we—" She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Margaret opened the envelope, spread the documents on the table, the intake photograph, the exit photograph, the weight charts, the medical assessments. "When I was captured, I was dying. I didn't know it. But these records show I had severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, early organ damage. The American doctors said I wouldn't have survived another 6 months." Her mother stared at the intake photograph. "That's you?" "That was me. That's what Germany did to us. To all of us. Slow starvation we normalized because everyone was experiencing it. And the Americans fed me, treated me, healed me, not because they were kind, because the Geneva Convention requires medical care for all prisoners. They followed the rules, Mama. They followed rules that Germany stopped following years ago." Her mother was quiet for a long time. Then, "Your sister died. Helga. Her heart failed. The doctor said malnutrition had weakened it beyond repair. She died 3 weeks ago." The words hit like a physical blow. Helga. Dead. Dead from the same condition Margaret had been rescued from. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be. You survived. That's what matters." Her mother touched the